January 11th, 2020. Well, the first in the nation Iowa caucuses are just a little over 3 weeks away, followed a week later by the somehow also first in the nation New Hampshire primary. Alas, poor Marianne Williamson, who has often served, rightfully, as the butt of many of the jokes in this series of essays, is no longer with us. No, she's not dead, at least not physically, just, dropped out of the race. The Oprah Whisperer may not have made it to opening day, but she did outlast several, shall we say, more realistic candidates, including Julian Castro and John Hickenlooper, not to mention no longer destined for greatness hopefuls such as Beto O'Rourke and Kamala Harris. So here's your participation trophy, Marianne. Good job. But before the good people in places like Sioux City and, don't call us London, Derry, head to the polls or high school gymnasia to cast their votes, I'd like to say a word about electability. If you've been paying any attention to the campaign so far, you've no doubt heard many pundits and even some voters bring up the E word. Some even go so far as to say it's the most important quality they're looking for in a candidate. Not a prospect's position on healthcare or immigration, national security, or even taxing the wealthy. Just someone who can, for the love of all that is holy, beat Donald Trump. In fact, so-called electability may be the single largest factor in Joe Biden's lead in many national polls. It will also, without a doubt, lead to the downfall of the Democratic nominee should the party settle on someone who is, quote-unquote, electable. Using Watergate as a not-so-arbitrary benchmark, there have been 11 presidential elections since the birth of the modern political campaign. Republicans have won 6 of these contests with 4 different nominees. 3 Democrats have accounted for that party's 5 presidents over the same time frame, and none of them, not a single one, was considered electable at this point in the campaign cycle. And of the 6 Democratic losers, and trust me, they were losers in more than one sense of the word, the 5 who weren't running as incumbents were overwhelmingly considered to have the electability thing nailed. Let's start with Walter Mondale in 1984. I'd prefer not to, but history. Mondale was such a milquetoast vice president that he made his boss look like Jim Carrey on meth. He was in the on-deck circle after Jimmy Carter lost his bid for re-election and stood absolutely no chance against the Morning in America Gipper. To Mondale's credit, he held serve in his home state, something not every Democrat would be able to claim. In addition to Minnesota, he won 3 electoral votes for a total of 13. Hell, LBJ's 1964 landslide was a squeaker by comparison. In 1988, the Democrats took a hard look at themselves after 8 years as White House exiles and came up with Michael Dukakis. He ran a valiant campaign, if by valiant you mean looking ridiculously silly with his head popping out of a tank, and got positively trounced by a less than dynamic George H.W. Bush. Dukakis kept his home state advantage, but alas, Massachusetts' 13 electoral votes paled behind California's 47 and even New Jersey's 16, all of which went to Bush the Elder, making him the first vice president to become president since Martin Van Buren in 1836. Remember Van Buren? How about Dukakis? Electable? Not. In 2000, of course, Bush Sr.'s kid won a hotly contested election over Al Gore by a 5-4 majority in the U.S. Supreme Court. Because nothing fails like whatever the opposite of success is, the Democrats ran another next batter-up candidate to carry on the tradition of Bill Clinton, only without all the scandals. Gore drove the lane through the primaries as uncontested as one of former NBA player Bill Bradley's layups on account of Gore was, electable and all. And Bradley was his only Democratic challenger. Gore ended up conceding on election night, then unconceding, then contesting the Florida vote count, then pretty much giving up on even that challenge. I mean, if Gore had bothered to win his home state of Tennessee, he would have gotten to sit behind the desk in the Oval Office. Instead, America got 8 years of George W. Bush and never looked back. 4 years later, the ever-electable, ever-relatable John Kerry beat a field of self-imploding hopefuls before proving that he was entirely unrelatable. And, of course, unelectable. Not that Kerry didn't overcome such overwhelming odds as running against a highly unpopular president who had lied the country into one war while slashing taxes for rich people like Well, like John Kerry. Good old J.K. made a game of it and all, but while he hoped to make like his initial namesake, a guy named Kennedy, he lacked the charm, grace, and political chops of the man whose Senate seat he had held. My disgust with Kerry and his flat campaign led me to renounce any affiliation with the Democratic Party and swear never again to vote for a candidate I didn't believe in. And I haven't. Which brings us to 2016. Anyone remember what happened on November 8th of that year, other than it being my 56th birthday? Yeah, I was born the day Kennedy was elected president. Oh, right. The Democrats went with another in a series of electable nominees who then proceeded to show just how unelectable she was. So, how unelectable was Hillary Clinton? She lost to Donald Trump. Hillary was a feckless, untrustworthy career politician who lost to a reality TV star who had boasted of grabbing women by their precincts. Of the three Democrats who have become president since Watergate, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, none was considered electable in January of their election year. Carter and Clinton were little-known governors, while Obama was a skinny guy with a funny name who had delivered one great speech. And yet, somehow, each of them became the leader of the free world. The lesson here is that Democrats tend to fall so in love with their presidents that they nominate someone for what is essentially another term of a previous administration, Mondale, Gore, Hillary, to fight yesterday's battles instead of getting behind someone who wants to look forward to the challenges of the next decade and beyond. So, to the Democrats and independents who can vote in some states, like California, my message is this. You can promote a so-called electable Paul to the top of your ticket, then watch as he likely loses to that guy. Or you can trust yourself to put forth someone who represents new ideas and maybe even a new generation who may well send the abomination in chief packing. What have you got to lose?